The Florida Panthers are reportedly working to re-sign two of their top four defensemen, and Aleksander Barkov is one game away from breaking the all-time games played record for the Florida Panthers.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, November 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. You can follow this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you will get a chance to win this hat with the Florida Panthers logo on the side, Amerant Bank on the side as well, and on the back saying official bank of the Florida Panthers. Make sure you send in your screenshot of your subscription to the Locked On Florida Panthers YouTube page to me personally at MondoMan12 on X or on X on at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well for your entry. But man, what a jam-packed show we have here. And thankfully, it is Wednesday and it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. We get to talk about a whole bunch of topics in the world of the Florida Panthers. And both of us happen to be wearing our Halloween costumes as we are recording this right before we are about to do our Halloween celebrations. To tell you guys the exact time, 7:21 p.m. on a Tuesday night. And we have our Halloween costumes here. You can't see the shorts. You can only see the shirts, but I am Patrick Star on Halloween. And I got a question for Jacob. What is that thing?
This thing is thing one. And it's a full onesie. I got the hood with the weird thing one hair going on. I figured I'm a big Florida Panthers fan. I'm a Cats fan, so might as well dress up as a thing from Cat in the Hat. So that's what we're going with today. But I will say the Patrick Star is fantastic, and the Finland video made my entire day. So thank you for that.
If you want to check out that video, you can check out my personal account at MondoMan12 or the Locked On Florida Panthers Instagram page where they are posted there. And what will only be fitting is if my cat makes another appearance on the show. The door is open, and she gets to do it. Come on whenever she wants. It's all up to her as far as being fitting with as far as cats are related. But speaking of the cats, and let before we go into the main topics of the show. We're going to spend segment number one talking about everything that happened on Monday night with the Florida Panthers and Boston Bruins. Mostly, honestly, just one thing as far as that. And was really looking forward to having you on the show, Jacob, to discuss this because we knew that something was going to be handed down. We weren't expecting to get an official announcement of the suspension this quickly. And we happened to find out 30 minutes before getting on. And is the illegal check to the head from Charlie McAvoy to Oliver Ekman-Larsson on Monday night. It was actually a phone conversation, and the terms of the phone conversation based on hearings is that it's no more than a 5-game suspension of all indications. And we've seen something like Rasmus Anderson and his hit on Patrick Laine earlier this season as well. And the official suspension for Charlie McAvoy is 4 games for the Bruins defenseman. And the next 4 games for the Boston Bruins is versus Toronto, at Detroit versus the Dallas Stars, and at home against the New York Islanders as well. And once again, let's before I get your opinion on this, my friend, it's a hit that just doesn't belong in the sport. The puck was way away, going to the point, and then you see McAvoy just skating in stride. And with Oliver Ekman-Larsson's inability to defend himself, goes out the rest of the game. And also George Peros as far as him deciding the length of suspension, there's also an indication of maybe how long Oliver Ekman-Larsson is also going to be out for. And we could put two and two together that it's likely head concussion protocol related as far as that. But what says you, my friend, on the ruling and more importantly a hit that doesn't belong in this game?
Yeah, I had a big problem with it yesterday, and I really do wish the Panthers had been able to capitalize on the 5-on-4 for 5 minutes. But it's also hard for me to really drag them for that when Oliver Ekman-Larsson is the power play quarterback, and he had to leave the game due to concussion protocol. So the Panthers were at that point down to literally not having a power play QB at that time because Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson are the three guys you count on to run your power play in some way, shape, or form, and you had none of them at that time. Personally, I don't even think Charlie McAvoy should have been in the game to make that hit on Oliver Ekman-Larsson. I feel like he should have been tossed in the first period when he tried to do the same thing, when he did do the same thing to Carter Verhaeghe. It went undetected, and we're very lucky that Verhaeghe was able to sort of get his head a little bit out of the way of that blow and not end up injured and in concussion protocol himself. But it was a reckless hit on Verhaeghe, and then to do the same thing again in the third period on Oliver Ekman-Larsson, it's unnecessary. It's stupid. It has no place in hockey, and that's the kind of thing you're trying to get out of the game. It's a rivalry that's building after last postseason, the first round. We all know what happened in that series, and Charlie McAvoy really overshadowed a great game for himself by making a really stupid decision. He scored the game-tying goal. He was everywhere, all over the ice. He played a really solid game, but two just blatant cheap shots that there's no reason for. It has no place in the sport. I personally, I feel like given that he did it to Ekman-Larsson and Verhaeghe in the same game, I was hoping for an in-person hearing and something a little bit longer. I would have hoped for 5 or 6 games. That would be a pretty high punishment. That the player safety doesn't tend to go that high usually, unless it's a multiple-time repeat offender, or someone like Tom Wilson, for example, or Brad Marchand, who have had really lengthy suspensions. But 4 games, it's okay. I don't feel like player safety dropped the ball. It fits precedent because Rasmus Andersson got 4 games for his hit on Patrick Laine. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he got 4 games. So I guess it fits the crime, but for me, I think it's gonna make things interesting going forward because the Panthers and Bruins do meet up a couple more times this year. Once again in 3 weeks, I believe November 22nd is that next meeting.
Yep, day before Thanksgiving.
Yep, in South Florida. And I expect that Charlie McAvoy will be a targeted man in that game because we've seen it with this team. Last year, Nico Hischier injured Barkov on a play that wasn't really malicious, but injured the captain, and he was targeted every time they met from that point on. Matthew Tkachuk went at him. I fully expect McAvoy to face some sort of retribution, and I hope he answers the bell when that comes so we can put this in the past.
Yeah, and George Parros has been really busy as well because Connor Clifton also had an illegal check to the head of Nico Hischier a few weeks ago, and also Brett Howden had one in the opening night against the Seattle Kraken on Brandon Tanev as well. So there's a lot of these checks to the head. I'm just when you think about how when it comes to head injuries and how the brain is like, how do I put the words to it? When concussions are just a difficult thing to grasp as well. And when you go after someone's head and thinking about quality of life, you got to give credit to the player safety that they are handing down the suspensions that they are. But it's just really you really think about how the message that they're sending as well when it comes to, hey, this isn't going to be tolerated about it when it comes to this. And thankfully, Charlie McAvoy is paying the price for what he did. And it's just, once again, like we've talked about, it's just a hit that just does not belong in this game. And thankfully and hopefully, Charlie McAvoy does learn his lesson. And like you said, hopefully he does answer the call when November 22nd does come around, because don't you think that these guys are going to forget? They will definitely not forget, especially with how soon they meet up again. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss some of the rumor mill based on 2 Florida Panthers defensemen. And we are going to discuss what we think about that rumor based on two of the top 4 guys possibly getting re-signed. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And when you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in the same place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you could do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, Assessment, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed US data shows 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only paid for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application. Pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, November 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday edition of the show, a Winans Wednesday edition. And I also wanted to wait for this conversation on today's show because Tuesday's show was all about breaking down the game. And, things can wait a little bit, especially with 2 days off between the Florida Panthers and the Detroit Red Wings game on Thursday night. And literally out of less than 2 hours before puck drop of Panthers Bruins, Kevin Weeks came out with a report. Well, not necessarily breaking any signings, but the fact that Bill Zito is working to re-sign 2 of the Panthers' top 4 defensemen. And this is something that we've talked about all throughout the offseason of the whole bunch of expiring contracts that the Florida Panthers have on their books, Jacob. And we spoke even during the summer how you're going to have to keep one of Brandon Montour and or Gus Forsling, or one of Brandon Montour and Sam Reinhart, but you can't keep all 3. And it's going to be really hard to keep both of them. For me, I don't think you're giving Brandon Montour more than $8 million. I don't think you're giving Gus Forsling more than $5 million. And I'd be very hesitant if I'm Bill Zito to even give them max term as far as the 8-year deal for the Panthers. And this also means if you sign both of them, it's bye-bye to Sam Reinhart. But with the explosion that he's had as far as 8 goals through the first 9 games for Sam Reinhart, number one, you're not going to sell him if you're in the top 3. He is part of what's good for the short term for the Florida Panthers. But this also goes to show, from what I'm reading between the lines, that the Panthers, the management, is more confident about the forward pipeline of how the Panthers can maneuver things on the cheap for guys coming up, like even 2 guys who haven't even signed their ELCs yet in Josh Davies, who's a point per game in Portland, Jack Devine, who's over a point per game at the University of Denver, and even one guy in Charlotte who the Panthers just signed recently, and Jake Wise, he's having a good start to the season in Charlotte. It also just goes to show the confidence in the forward group, but the defensive group is not so much as far as depth. Evan Noss is not a sure thing as well. We don't even know if Kasper Puccio is going to even sign his ELC as well. Santu Kinnunen is off to a great start in Charlotte as well, being the power play quarterback. I know I just threw a lot at you just now, Jacob, but what are your thoughts on the report of Montour and Forsling, the working of getting them re-signed?
I think the only way you really manage to keep both of them is if both of them prioritize team-friendly contracts, which, I don't know how realistic that ends up being. But with that said, I think, like you said, it speaks to the Panthers management's confidence in the pipeline offensively with the forward group, but not so much on the defensive side of things. And I think just in general, the premium is higher on defensemen. You tend to have to pay more for a good defenseman than you do for a good forward. You can find good forwards at kind of not necessarily cheap, but you can find good forwards that fit your system without breaking the bank. And a good example of that is a guy like Evan Rodriguez, who the Panthers got on a 3x3, and he's absolutely playing fantastic right now. I think the Panthers in general, they have their forward core sort of locked in when you think about Barkov and you think about Tkachuk, and it's just about surrounding those guys. Sam Bennett has a little bit of term. You've got Evan Rodriguez, you've got Ed Toulouse-Stranin, so they've got some forward options. Defensively, I think it gets a little bit more murky because at the end of the day, if you don't sign Montour and you don't sign Forsling, you have to sign someone. And I think the bet here is that re-signing them to whatever contracts you're able to get done with them, it's going to end up being more cost effective than going the free agency route and trying to sign defensemen, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to spend that money on a defenseman anyway if you let them walk. So I think that it really speaks to the fact that the Panthers don't exactly have NHL ready defensemen in the pipeline, at least not guys who are ready to play on a contending team. If we were in a rebuild situation, it's a little bit different, but this is a contending team. And the defensemen we have right now are guys that got us there and guys that you can't easily replace. And I think Bill Zito has shown that if we lose a forward, if a guy has to walk, we have a much better chance of replacing them at a lower premium on a value deal. If you think of someone like Carter Verhaeghe, who came into the Panthers on a 2-year, $1 million AAV. I mean, it's a little bit easier to find diamonds in the rough in the forward group than on the defense. So I think that's really where my mind is going with that. But also the fact that I think this summer it becomes someone's going to have to go. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's someone that is under contract who ends up traded, bought out, or moved to make space. And obviously the big name that comes to mind would be Sergei Bobrovsky, whose contract becomes modified no trade after this year. If you find a way to move that, then it looks a lot more feasible to keep some of these pieces together.
Yeah, and even the names that I mentioned earlier on the forward group, like those aren't guys who are going to come right away into the NHL roster as far as contending.
Right.
The guys who are going to be closer to that are Mackie Samoskevich and Justin Sordiff as well. And if you're paying for a premium for defensemen outside of the organization to come in, I mean, we were speaking all summer about Noah Hannafin, and right now there's contract talks have stalled right now with him and the Calgary Flames, and Calgary's in a little bit of a crossroads as well as far as the next direction of where they're going as well. So, I mean, Noah Hannafin's 27 years old, so a little bit on the younger side, well, not necessarily younger side, but like, good in the short term for the Panthers if they were to bring him in as well. So it's just really comes down to that confidence as well. And they know the system. They are familiar with it. So it's like what are you comfortable with as far as the guys who are here, guys who were part of bringing this team to a Stanley Cup final versus having to do it all over again with the different group. I mean by the time let's say you lose both of them, which I don't see a situation where both of them walk.
No.
You only two guys would remain from the Stanley Cup final run, which would be Ekblad and Mahura. Well, Mahura is also a free agent too, coming up. But that is a lot of the blue line that you are turning over from, and new combinations and all. And Sergei Bobrovsky having to work, if he's still around, having to work under that new core as well. I'm not saying the championship window would close, but you would have a different view on what the championship window could be. I mean, we saw the Washington Capitals had a whole bunch of free agents this past offseason, but they are a little older, so it's not exactly the same. But we are seeing the fact that it was a little harder for them this past season to get the pieces around and fit everyone under. That's going to be the situation for the Panthers.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And especially when it comes to the blue line on defense, you want to have as little turnover as possible. Forwards, it's a little bit easier to grasp the system. And when a forward makes a mistake, it's not as pronounced. It doesn't usually end up with a goal in the back of your net. When you have defensemen trying to learn a system, we've seen how long it can take for a defense to grasp the system. We saw when Coach Joel Quenneville came in, how much the Panthers D really struggled in front of Sergei Bobrovsky to grab hold of that new system that they weren't used to playing under. Same thing under Paul Maurice. The Panthers defensively to start last season really, really struggled. So being able to maintain guys who know the system, who are comfortable in it, that's a big help. So as little turnover as you can create on the blue line, the better. I think also it's tough to bet on Aaron Ekblad as the mainstay on that blue line. Not talent wise. Talent wise, he's fantastic, but injury wise, he's far and away the most injury prone defenseman on that blue line. Unfortunately, he's got a lot of mileage on him for a guy his age because he started so early at 18 years old. He's suffered some pretty bad injuries, and he's still out right now after his Warrior run in the Stanley Cup. So it's tough to put all your eggs in the Aaron Ekblad basket on defense. And I think if you manage to keep Ekblad, Montour, Forsling in some way, that's a really solid core three. Nico Mikkola will be there for at least 2 more years after this,
and cheap,
and for cheap. So that now you've got a pretty solid top 4 that you can work with. So I personally, I think it makes sense. It's tough to do cap wise, definitely, and there will have to be tough decisions and some cutbacks made in other areas. But if you can limit turnover on defense, you're really setting yourself up for a little bit more success, because we've seen how defense can really carry a team. Look at a team like Boston. They lost so much from their forward group, but their defense really remained largely intact, and they're off to a ridiculous start this season again. So keeping that defense together has to be priority number 1. And when we talk about prospects, I would also caution people in assuming that prospects will make it, and also caution people in assuming prospects will be here. Because if the Panthers are contenders and we get to the trade deadline and there's a piece that can be had that can potentially take us over the top, and a rental player that can help us in a deep playoff run, prospects that we're counting on being here in the future may not, because those are the trade chips that get you championship players at the deadline.
No doubt. And that is those are once again the hard decisions that I'm glad that I'm not an NHL GM and having to make these hard decisions, for sure. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to talk all about the captain, as he is 1 game away from breaking the all-time games played record in Florida Panthers history. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper, and a new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. With Aleksander Barkov could score 50 goals, the Panthers could hoist the Stanley Cup, and you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick studs like Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, and even guys outside of the Florida Panthers like a Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, or Nathan McKinnon. And if they record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game, you could win a 100 times bet on sleeper. All you just need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Panther fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, November 1st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. So, Jacob, this has been a very highly anticipated week as far as the captain Aleksander Barkov getting his opportunity. And, we saw this inching closer last week, right before Aleksander Barkov missed the Sharks game with an illness. But now, feeling on the better side of that illness, and now being one game away from being having the all-time record in games played at 672, assuming that he plays Thursday against the Detroit Red Wings from Little Caesars Arena. And other records that the captain has: most points, first, most power play goals, game-winning goals. Next year, he will have the most years played in an organization, passing Stephen Weiss. And still a few other stats that he is 5 shorthanded goals away from breaking Rag Dvorak's record, 3 shorthanded assists from passing a 3-way tie between Robert Svela, Bill Lindsay, and Derek McKenzie, and all. So those are other stats that he still has to go for, and 29 power play assists away from passing Jonathan Huberdeau. And with 7 years left, man, this guy's going to blow basically most of the records out of the water with how long he is. At least the Panthers are planning for him to stay. And Paul Maurice was asked on Sunday just about Barkov's overall attitude, about just how his being a role model in the community. We know what he does with the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital, 1,600 for a goal, 800 for an assist as well. But Paul Maurice also spoke about the human being of Aleksander Barkov, and if he were a parent and taking his kid to a hockey game, when you think about a person you want to emulate, it's Aleksander Barkov. And, scoring a goal in his first game against the Dallas Stars back in 2013 as well, through all the different coaches. And now finally the captain has had some stability for now going into his late 20s in his career. And now it's all paying off for him. And he still hasn't hoisted that cup yet. And Maurice was also asked maybe a possible statue. A little bit more has to happen before a statue, but number retired, definitely a huge possibility, because the Panthers still only have one player that has their number retired. But we're all feeling really good that number 16 will be in the rafters at Emirates Bank Arena one day.
Definitely. It's almost comical. The way Barkov has snuck up on some of these records. He does what he does so quietly, so under the radar. There's been seasons where he's missed chunks of time with injuries or various illnesses and things. So at times you forget that he really is tearing up the Panthers record books. But he's accomplished almost everything there is to accomplish already. He's not even 30 yet. Winning a Stanley Cup is obviously the number one thing he still has to do. I also don't believe that he's a guy that we can say won't win a Hart Trophy. I think he's absolutely an MVP caliber player, and I'm sticking by my prediction that he will be a Hart Trophy finalist this year. I really think he has it in him. He looked fantastic yesterday against Boston, but it's gotten to a point now where Panthers, in terms of Panthers history, you can pretty much pencil him in to break every record except for penalty minutes and goalie wins, unless he decides to become a goalie or an enforcer in his second half of his career, which I don't think we anticipate. But
he'll need 1,500 penalty minutes to break Paul Laus's record.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty ridiculous amount of penalty minutes for a guy who I don't think has ever wanted to drop the gloves in his entire life. And that really speaks to Barkov's character. He's a great guy on the ice, greater guy off the ice. He's exactly like Paul Maurice said. He's a guy that if you're getting someone into hockey, that's the exact type of player and person you want them to look up to and emulate in their game. It's crazy. It feels like Barkov just started his career. I was 13 years old when he scored his first goal and made his debut against the Dallas Stars, and now he's over here breaking records. He's older than me, but makes me feel old because he's been in the league for some time now. But it's awesome to see. I wish he could do it at home. That'd be really cool to do that at home. But I'm cool with him breaking every record there is to break, home or away. As long as he lifts that Stanley Cup in front of the Emirates Bank crowd, that's all I ask for.
Yeah, and hey, the fact that you have a player like this who is a humble person as well, and is a very team over me example when it comes to that, and just when it comes to guys who are gonna leave a legacy here in more than just what they do on the ice, and it just speaks volume, and just has the chance to be also the longest serving captain as well in the history of this franchise too. And it's just it's crazy when you think of, and even when I saw the Emirates Bank Arena 30-year sign with the first captain in Panthers history, Brian Skrudlin, and then Aleksander Barkov side by side next to each other, it's like you really get to appreciate. And I hope that you guys, the listeners, and get to really take this in. I know we have sometimes our complaints about Barkov being a very passive player and all, and yeah, this season specifically, he has 14 shots on goal, 20 less than the highest person, which is Matthew Tkachuk. But what he does in the different areas of the ice in all three zones, and he has a Selke to his name, and all, and just a pure example of what to do, how to lead, when to say the right thing and when not to as well. Choosing his spots, more importantly, of when to say something as well. And South Florida, you guys are very lucky to have this guy as the captain of this team, and I'm looking forward to Thursday night as he takes on the ice for that record-breaking game. Tomorrow's show, we are going to preview the game against the Detroit Red Wings. We might have a special guest on the show, maybe not. Don't want to ruin something that is not set in stone yet. So definitely can't wait to preview the game as Sam Reinhart and Alex DeBrincat, two leaders in the Rocket Richard race, will be going up against each other. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this show, talking all about the suspension, possible signings of the top 4D, and of course a conversation about the captain as well, and as he is getting ready to break that record. So thank you once again for joining me, my friend, and tell everybody where they can follow you.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8 as usual. And before I sign off, this is my first time being on the show in the past week, so obviously the tragedy with Adam Johnson over in the EIHL, I just want to address that real quick. Obviously, my thoughts and prayers and full support to Adam Johnson, his family, his teammates. I'm happy to see everyone advocating now for neck guards. You saw the Penguins mandated neck and wrist guards for their AHL and ECHL affiliates. I think that's super important. But yeah, definitely wanted to say just say a couple words about Adam Johnson and the tragedy that the hockey community suffered. Because when one player suffers something like that, it affects the entire hockey community globally. And also just offer my support to Matt Petgrave because there was absolutely no intent there. And he also needs the full support of the hockey community as well, because it's a tragedy that he's going to have to live with. And I can't even imagine what he's going through. So my thoughts with everyone over there in that league and just the hockey community in general.
No doubt. And also rest in peace to Mike Rubin, who was a longtime director for Bally Sports / Fox Sports as well, who recently passed away as well. And I didn't know Mike Rubin personally, but he was someone who affected many lives in the hockey community, especially in the Florida Panthers community as well. So definitely want to send our thoughts and prayers to the family of them, of Mike Rubin and Adam Johnson once again as well. So Jacob, thank you once again, and I will see you next week, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.